Namo Adirafa. Thanks so much for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This wonderful sound calls us back to our true home. The second mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I vow to cultivate loving kindness and learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I will practice generosity by sharing my time, energy, and material resources with those in real need. I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. I will respect the property of others, but I will prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth. For our Dharma lesson, we've been reading More Than Mindfulness, Widening the Field of Practice by the Monastics of the Thai Forest Sangha. And we're beginning a talk by Ajahn Karunadhammo called In This Body. The contemplation of the 32 parts of the body is a favorite of mine. It's something I've spent a fair amount of time practicing with and nurturing as a contemplative practice. A little background of how I came to practice with it. I started meditation practice on my own as a solo endeavor, self-taught, quite young, in my late teens, just dabbling a bit off and on. I got more seriously involved in meditation practice as I got into my 20s and my 30s, but essentially it was all self-taught from books and without a particular foundation in Buddhism. I didn't know much about the teachings of the Buddha until the age of 30 or so. I just knew inside myself there was something I needed to do to help settle the mind. Meditation felt like something to pursue, but I didn't really know what Buddhism was all about. I stumbled my way along, knowing it had something to do with sitting quietly and watching my mind. Then I came across some of the teachings of meditation in the West, mostly meditation on breathing as a way of calming the mind and just following the instructions that I was able to find. Most of these teachings came from Westerners who practiced in Southeast Asia, particularly the Burmese style, which was often how it was introduced into the United States and Western Europe. The meditation technique I learned was watching the breath with a very narrow focus somewhere in the body, the belly, the nose, or the chest, and developing an exclusive focus on a very small point to help settle the mind and not get distracted. That's what meditation was in my mind, and that's what I doggedly pursued for many years on my own. I got some enjoyment out of it, or at least a sense that this is something I should be doing, and kept pursuing it, even though I found it quite challenging. I didn't really know what else to do. But then I started to get connected with the monastic tradition in my early 30s, and was introduced to the Wat Pa Pong tradition mostly through the West, Abhayagiri Monastery in England. Ajahn Amaro was just starting to make some regular visits to the West Coast on invitation of the Sangha Pala Foundation, and I got to know the tradition in that way through gradual exposure. A whole new world started to open up. I started to really understand and explore the teachings of the Buddha as they were brought to us in the monastic tradition. This included a much wider range of teachings than just a meditation technique, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. I was very pleased with the fullness of the practice, and all of a sudden it started to make some sense. I kept plugging away with the meditation technique that I'd learned on my own, but I didn't really develop a lot of competence with it. But it didn't seem to matter all that much to me because of the wider perspective that I was starting to understand. I finally made the decision to pursue monastic training around the age of 40 and ordained at Abhayagiri Monastery, Buddhist monastery. Over the first 6 months we were here, we were so busy getting the monastery set up, and I had many duties as an anagarika. I was very occupied in that way, learning the precepts and the other fundamentals of monastic training, but still doing the same meditation technique. After about 6 or 7 months, and with the arrival of Longpo Pasano, we went into a period of winter retreat for 2 months. We started in February, and for the first time I sat down with Longpo. He was doing interviews with a handful of us, as he has done almost every year during our winter retreats. The first time I sat with him, he asked me about my meditation practice, and I had to be very honest with him. I told him that for years I had been doing this mindfulness of breathing with a very small, narrow focus point with attention on the tip of the nose. It felt pretty hopeless, actually. I didn't feel like my mind got very settled at all, and I talked about that to some extent with him. He was listening and finally just said, "You should stop doing mindfulness of breathing. You've developed such a habit of negativity around it because it's not been working, and you need to take a break from it and do something else." I was a bit confounded. "Well, what else is there?" He replied, "Pick up the contemplation of the 32 parts of the body." I was familiar with that contemplation from our chanting, but I didn't know much about it. It sounded kind of interesting and certainly seemed better than doggedly pursuing out of some sort of loyalty this technique that didn't seem to be working. I asked, "How long do you think I should do that for?" And he replied, "A year." I was surprised. "A year and no mindfulness of breathing?" Longpo replied, "No anapanasati, just do the 32 parts." I received some instruction from him on how to pursue that and made that my meditation practice for the next year. I memorized the chant that we do in Pali and English, spending lots of time reciting it and developing it over a year's time. At the end of a year, having received a lot of benefit from it, I talked with Longpo Pasano again. "Okay, it's been a year. Should I start practicing again?" He said, "No, too soon." "Okay, so what should I do?" He recommended, "Switch focus to some metta bhavana, working with loving kindness and contemplations." "That sounds interesting. So how long should I do that for?" Once more he replied, "A year." I asked, "A year? And no anapanasati?" His reply, no anapanasati." So that was my next year, which was my year as a novice. After that year, I met with Longpo again and was given permission to resume anapanasati. But this time, it was with a firm practice of the 32 parts contemplation and metta bhavana to act as a very strong foundation for further explorations with anapanasati. May all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may all beings be peaceful. Namo Adida Phat. Thanks so much for joining me today.